At number 10, we have SCP-1591. So SCP-1591 is a big, beautiful, levitating glass star sculpture. It seems that at the core of the sculpture, there is glass in the shape of a star weighing around 12 kilos. This in turn is surrounded by further coloured glass panels weighing 12 kilos each. It's a heavy enough star. Here's a picture for those of you struggling to visualise, and really a picture is all you want here because you actually couldn't look at this SCP directly. It seems that SCP-1591 is kept in a room with 30 high-intensity spotlights pointed right at it. These spotlights need to be replaced monthly. Why? Well, SCP-151 produces a light of its own, which increases in brightness and intensity over time, especially in dark environments. When its light shines on a solid object, it at first becomes transparent and then slowly fades away, hence why the spotlight needs replacing as they slowly break down and stop working. Now, if a person is directly exposed to the light, they will lose the ability to speak and will try and run away. Unfortunately though, the light will destroy them, eventually making them disappear. It seems that SCP-1591's power was increased when the site was bombed in the World War. It seems that as time goes on, the brightness of the lights used to quell 1591 needs to increase. For example, if a 40-watt bulb contained it a week ago, by now it will need a 60-watt, so on and so forth. Each month when the spotlights are replaced, they have to get brighter. Now this SCP can only be stopped by bright lights, but eventually we'll run out of lights bright enough. When we do, it will start evaporating things on Earth, everything around it. I guess our only option is to take it to the sun. Okay, I'm a drama girl, so I will absolutely bite. I love the concept behind SCP-701, but it's deadly. Information coming here at number 9. SCP-701 is a 5-act play named The Hanged King's Tragedy. There are multiple copies of the play on lockdown in an anonymous storage site in the SCP Foundation. The observed behaviour surrounding SCP-701 is as follows. A group of people decide to do a play, The Hanged King's Tragedy, and as they start rehearsing it, they notice that the content changes every time they meet up, but they don't really realise it, just something weird's going on. As the play begins for its opening night, it's a sellout, a mysterious figure, SCP-701-1, appears on the stage at the end of Act 1. Now the figure is a tall humanoid dressed in black with a hood over its head. The audience noticed, but the cast do not. The audience obviously think it's part of the play, and they're enjoying it. He then continues to appear at intervals before officially coming on stage as the Hanged King during Act 5. Under his gaze, the cast then begin to kill themselves on stage until they're all dead. This is when the audience realise that actually this is no play. Riots break out in the audience, and if any audience member manages to leave, they do so in a daze, committing random acts of violence until they're killed or intercepted by members of the SCP Foundation. If audience members survive and are treated, they're often psychotic for the rest of their life. Some may have no memory of the incident. The reason this SCP could end the world lays in the fact that a VHS and DVD of the performance exists. Anyone who watches it would be prone to hateful and violent outbursts. One play that I don't think I'd enjoy. Coming into number 8, we have SCP-173. The sculpture. This SCP is all of your weeping angel nightmares come true, although we all do have to enjoy the rhyme of saying SCP-173. Absolutely none of us wants to be around this super creep though, I'm telling you. SCP-173 is on lockdown in a sealed container in Unit 19 of the SCP Foundation. The SCP itself has been known as the art piece, as it looks like some kind of ghoulish contemporary art sculpture from hell. Before we talk about the main concern with the SCP, I'd just like to highlight that it seems to seep feces and blood, which is pretty damn unsanitary. Aside from that though, like with the weeping angels in Doctor Who, you basically never ever want to close your eyes around it. Why? Because if you do, it will come closer and closer to you, and when it does finally get to you, it will snap your neck at the base of your skull. It's a killer, so no blinking. The SCP-173 will not stop until everyone who has ever blinked in its presence is dead. So next up, we kind of basically have the exact opposite of SCP-173 at number 7. We have SCP-096. So, I'm not going to show you a picture of SCP-096. Instead, you can look at me. You'll find out why. Often referred to as the Shy Guy, SCP-096 will get you. I guess they all get you in the end, don't they? SCP-096 is kept in a locked steel cube and is checked up weekly for cracks and holes. There can be absolutely no CCTV or video surveillance of any kind when it comes to SCP-096. Any images of this SCP must be destroyed. You can't even draw it. Why? SCP-096 is a humanoid-looking creature with long limbs. It has blank, pale eyes, and its jaw can open 4 times wider than that of a normal human. Unlike with SCP-173, you can't look at it, ever. If you do look at it, it will freak out and kill you. Exactly how it kills you is classified. SCP-096 is noted for freaking out, crying, screaming, and becoming crazed when people look at it. Similarly, if a picture or a recording is taken, it will go crazy and kill. It seems that even looking at a photo or video of this SCP can kill you too. Exactly how? Once again, I don't know. How could it destroy the world? Well, if enough people saw it, hello, dead. Coming into number 6, we have SCP-1048. Okay, but like an SCP that looks like a teddy bear. I mean, that absolutely can't be good news, can it? And no, it isn't. SCP-1048 at first seems like a lovable teddy. Cute. It can move of its own accord, communicate through cutesy gestures, and loves hugs. Or so it seems. But it is all a ruse. SCP-1048 will often hug people's legs and draw childlike pictures and give them as gifts. It will even dance and jump, anything to make someone like it. But make no mistake, a lot like people who try hard in life, SCP-1048 is pure evil, something the SCP Foundation discovered the hard way. On one occasion, the SCP was observed having entirely replicated itself out of metal scraps. It seems that SCP-1048 has the ability to replicate using any given material, and for this reason, no teddy bears are allowed in the SCP Foundation whatsoever. Prior to the ear incident, this SCP was free to roam its holding site, but following the nightmare, the Foundation realized its true intentions. Oh, what was the ear incident? Let me tell you. It seems that SCP-1048 replicated itself out of human ears, removing the ears of all of the people around it within a 10-meter radius. A teddy bear made of ears. On one occasion, it appears that the SCP was able to abort a pregnant staff member's baby as it began replicating itself with baby parts. Honestly, a world filled with SCP teddy bears that pretend to be cuddly but then use deception and murder in order to replicate, honestly, it sounds like a dangerous world to me. Coming into number 5, we have SCP-1471. SCP-1471 will wreak havoc with your mobile devices. It's a free app usually named Mallow or version 1.00 in app stores. Now there's no listed developer, and somehow it's able to bypass approval. Once the app has been downloaded, users won't see any icon or shortcut and they will not be able to delete it. They're doomed. The SCP will then begin sending images to the phone every 3 to 6 hours. The image will contain SCP-1471-A, a humanoid with a goat-like skull with black hair. In the first 24 hours, the images will show the figure at locations frequented by the individual who downloaded the app. In the following 24 hours, the SCP will show up at places recently visited by the individual. After 72 hours, the individual will receive real-time images of SCP-1471-A within close proximity to them. Those who have had the app for 90 hours or more will begin to visualize SCP-1471-A within their peripheral vision, or even their reflections, or both. From then on in, it's a downward spiral. Individuals will actually see the SCP, who will try and communicate with them in a language that they don't understand. So, how could this end the world? Well, almost everyone has a phone, and this SCP will send people mad thinking they're seeing a skull with hair and crazy eyes. While this SCP has never been reported to have killed anyone, with people losing their minds around it, it would be hazardous to mental health and productivity. People wouldn't get any work done in a best case scenario. In a worst case, they would cause accidents or perhaps even try and gouge out their own eyes, which, again, infections. Nightmare. Puss. This SCP will send you insane at number 4. We have SCP-055. This SCP is literally unknowable. It's unknowable by definition. Whatever it is, it makes humans forget about it. Information about it just leaks out of humans' brains. It's a self-keeping secret. It is placed at Site 19, although how the facility was built, we don't actually know. All we know is that Site 19 is 5 by 5.2.5 in meters. What am I going to do with this information? Like, nothing. We don't know what's in this space, and those who go on to investigate it forget. Research has been conducted on those those who have been exposed to the SCP, and it seems that the only way of knowing it is by a series of yes-no answers. Now the loophole here is that while you can't know what it is or say what it is, you can know what it isn't. It seems one person question was asked if it was a sphere, to which they said no, but afterwards they didn't know what they were being asked, so not a sphere. Good. Great. What is it? Well, we don't know. To me, this makes me worried because it means we have no idea what it's up to. It could absolutely be plotting to end the world, and knowing the SCP Foundation, it probably is. Shall we start with a picture at number 3 to get the ball rolling? Sure, here it is. This is SCP-610, and it's an infection that causes serious and grotesque mutation. Hip hip hurrah, and we're back to pus again. Exposure to SCP-610 at first leads individuals to develop an itchy rash along with skin sensitivity. The rash will turn into heavy lesions and areas of what look like fresh scar tissue. These scar tissue wounds will then consume the whole body, and the process gets even quicker in warm conditions. It can take anywhere from 5 minutes in hot conditions to 5 hours in cold conditions, and it can absolutely destroy a person. The infected then no longer resembles a person and starts functioning at very high speed. The infected skin will start to grow rapidly and move of its own accord, with limbs becoming long and then branching out like roots, forming other fleshy limbs. Look! Without containment, they will continue to grow, and any living organism who touches it will become infected too. Infection is spread by touch, and sometimes even spores in the air. The infection was first noted in Siberia, and while it has been contained, it hasn't been destroyed. The areas infected continue to be so, and they are protected by SCP under the guise of military operations. If the containment was breached, then this infection could absolutely destroy the world. Coming into number 2, we have SCP-1548. Well, to me, this really is the baddie to end all baddies, except our number 1, of course. SCP-1548 is cosmic, and it wants us dead. SCP-1548 is a living star, an evil solar system moving towards us at breakneck speed. It seems this SCP was first discovered in the 1970s, with astronomers thinking it was simply another star, until it started moving towards us at increasing speed. Oh, and it's speaking to us via radio signals. It's a sentient star. Hurrah! So, what's it saying? That it wants to destroy all life in its path and it finds us pathetic. Good! Oh, and it also knows we're watching it too. How will it destroy us? Well, it seems it will steal us from our sun's orbit and then gobble us up in its fiery mouth. How long until it reaches us? Well, that's classified. Finally, coming into number 1 when you thought it couldn't get any worse. It does. It's the Scarlet King. The original SCP, or the original evil. The Scarlet King was originally named as SCP-001 until the SCP Foundation realized that actually he cannot be categorized as he is malice itself. Let me explain. It seems that the Scarlet King is a creature, to quote Jack Finch, whose sole demonic occupation is to usher in Armageddon and the end of all creation. Sure. The Scarlet King is the most malevolent entity in the universe and was born alongside the Tree of Knowledge, or so they say. The Scarlet King is as old as knowledge itself, and it seems that he's the overlord of darkness itself too. So basically, he's the devil. The actual devil. It's said that the Scarlet King is an elder god who has the power to conquer and destroy entire worlds, let alone civilizations. What's his beef? Well, he's declared war on creation itself, so not great. The SCP Foundation seems to think that any manifestation of evil is at the bidding of the Scarlet King. So a god as old as understanding, who's made it his sole purpose to end creation? I mean, it doesn't sound like a party I want to be at, does it? If you want to know about this SCP, we've got a video all about it on Life's Biggest Questions, basically the home of all kinds of SCP content. So guys, before we get balls deep into the world enders of the SCP Foundation, let's talk about SCP-2000 at number 10. How do you know that you aren't an SCP? Seriously, think about it. You could be. Could you not very well be a clone, or a clone of a clone? How would you know? Are we living in a matrix? Questions, yet no answers. Would the Foundation really be chill with so many world-ending Keter-class SCPs locked up in an actually kind of breachable facility? No, they would not. So in the end, it seems they created SCP-2000, a reality reboot, an SCP with the purpose of reconstructing civilization at the event of a K-class end-of-world scenario. The year it was created is classified, but the Foundation notes suggest that actually it's been activated at least twice in history, which means that we aren't living in the original world, which, you know, is worrying. The Foundation notes from Dr. Henrietta Eisenhower read, "If we ever have to do this again, please do not set the resume date further back than 20 years before the event. Not only can we piggyback on a lot of undestroyed structures if we do, but it will make continuity a lot easier to resume." What does that mean? Tell us more. It seems that the process begins with a core number of 5 million replacement humans who are then told they're part of SCP-2000, and these core humans then work together to smooth the reconstruction over. They make other replacement humans believe that they're living in the original reality, but we're not. My point being, if the world ended, like so many SCPs in this list could bring about, you would die. Sure. But you'd be replaced in a new world until you died in that world again. Coming into number 9, we have SCP-106. Does anyone smell like, I don't know, like something rotten? It could well be SCP-106, who smells like death and decay personified. His SCP presents as an elderly humanoid in a constant state of decomposing. Gross. It literally looks like an old rotting corpse, which I really don't want to see or smell, ever. 106 lays motionless for days and can hide in walls, floors and other objects, waiting to strike. When it does strike, it goes after 10 to 25-year-olds mostly, damaging their internal organs so they can't escape. It then pulls them into a pocket dimension, which to the outside world would look like a rotting piece of wood or a mouldy wall or something. It then devours its victims as they rot. Any physical contact between the SCP and any other matter, living or mineral, result in that person or item becoming corroded and rotten. A black mucus residue is produced that seems to assist the corrosion. Because of the nature of SCP-106, it manages to frequently escape containment, breaking out of its cell by blending into the walls and rotting it until it crumbles. This SCP could and would break and crumble and mold anything it touched in the world. Ugh. I can't get on board with mold. I really can't. Coming in at number 8, we have SCP-3007. SCP-3007 is an info hazard, which means that just by knowing about it, it can destroy the world. SCP-3007 is in the Keter class, and according to the Foundation, a containment breach of it would likely result in an XK class end of the world scenario. Good, fun. Okay, but what is it? SCP-3007 can best be understood by our mortal minds as a dream. A really bad dream. In this dream, whatever happens in the subconscious world happens to you in real life. If you're hurt in the dream, you're hurt in your bed. If you die in the dream, well, you know, you're dead. The SCP is known as the Red and is said to once have destroyed an alien civilization completely, and now it wants to bleed out into our world. The only way to contain this SCP is to kill anyone that is aware of it, and most especially those who have dreamed of it, so, you know, maybe be careful when you go to sleep tonight. Sorry about it. Coming into number 7, we have SCP-990. Is he trying to help or hinder? That's the question. SCP-990 is another dreamy creature. It appears in people's subconscious as they sleep as a Cold War era male. In the drawings and artworks created at the SCP, he is wearing a hat and has a kind of red stripe of light across his eyes. What does it mean? He is classed as Keter, obviously, although the Foundation don't actually know if the SCP is bad or good. He claims to be good, but you wouldn't you? Dreams in which SCP-990 show up tend to end with him making a grave future prediction. He'll warn the dreamer of a disaster which then inevitably comes true in their waking life. Sounds like a good Samaritan, right? Warning, get out of here? Well, the Foundation aren't actually too sure if maybe he's the one causing the disasters. Worse yet, he has made an end of the world prediction called 99007. He says that an SCP will bring about the end of everything we know, but that SCP isn't even yet known to the Foundation. When he made the warning, he claimed that the SCP is female and hasn't even been born. Remember the last part of this series? Well, some predicted it could be the child of SCP-2317. Coming into number 6, could this SCP end the world? Well, that really is the question, right? And as always, we really don't have too many answers, and I'm sorry about it. Meet SCP-3034. Now, I can't show you this SCP, but you can listen to it. so what you're hearing is a broadcast of unknown origin that has been noted 627 times since 1964. The broadcasts occur at apparently random intervals. The shortest known gap was 2 weeks, but the longest was 6 months. Now, if it's heard, Foundation members who speak Russian must respond in the same frequency with the message, "All is well." Why? Well, that's classified. What would happen if we didn't respond? Honestly, I dread to think. Could this SCP end the world? Well, probably. Coming into number 5, we have SCP-1782. Also a mystery is SCP-1782. It's a room measuring 42 by 45 square meters. It appears as an abandoned apartment complex located in Kiev in the Ukraine. The doorway to the room reads in Ukrainian 198D. Why? Well, by now I guess you should know better than to ask. The room continually changes. Sometimes it's a kitchen, sometimes it's a bedroom, sometimes it's a living room, and sometimes it's simply an empty space. Anyone who enters the room returns with a fear of holes, and nobody knows why, and I don't like tiny holes in the first place. Have I been to the room? Maybe I have. In the room, a faint sound of metal scraping on metal can be heard. On one occasion, a disembodied female voice could be heard saying, "Shakes me, makes me lighter." Curiouser and curiouser. Another time the room shifted and a man was being eaten alive by parrots without expressing any pain. What this room means and why it always changes is unknown, but the Foundation do not trust it. Neither do I. Tiny holes, once again. Ugh. Coming into number 4, we have SCP-409. SCP-409 is a large quartz crystal standing at 5 feet tall and 2 feet wide, so basically a crystal bigger than me. Big boy crystal. Shout out. The crystal is quarantined in a sealed granite container and it must never, ever be opened. But if it was, then any single thing that comes into contact it would begin to crystallize. Oh, and if it's exposed to the air, the crystal will continue to grow and drop shards of smaller crystals that will also turn everything that touches it into, you guessed it, crystals. Unless you want your blood to crystallize, which I can imagine is a slow and painful death, I would stay away from this SCP. The only problem is you could touch one of its offspring crystals without even knowing it and meet your end anyway. At least the end of the world would be shiny, so, you know, there's a plus. Coming into number 3, we have SCP-682. SCP-682 has an omnicidal rage, making it a beastie that you don't want to mess with. It is a large reptile-like creature that literally wants to kill everything, but like, actually everything. In its reptile-y form, it gets energy from anything and everything it ingests. It will keep eating until it's stopped, and the more it eats, the more powerful it gets. The SCP is a master of escaping containment and has to be submerged in hydrochloric acid to stop it from breaking free, although it has escaped 6 times. Despite being partially corroded by acid, the SCP can regenerate, and again, it wants you to die. Coming into number 2, we have SCP-2.5.2.1. No, I haven't gone mental, I just can't say the name of it. This SCP is an info hazard and can only be described or discussed in visuals. Any attempt to write or speak about the SCP will result in it coming to get you. Which, by the looks of things, wouldn't be pretty. So as I can't really talk about it, let me show you some images from the Foundation notes. So here's a picture of the SCP, and to me, it looks like it's made up from whirls of old VHS tape. Remember those? Here's a diagram explaining in visuals how you must never write, save information, or talk about it. Ugh. If you do, something about sticky tape pans? I don't know. What are you making from this? It seems like it can also escape confinement really easily, but showing it images seems to baffle it. I don't know if you guys are keeping up with this, but just keep looking. I'm just gonna keep showing you more images and really hope for the best, as I can't talk about it for fear of it wrapping me up in tapey hands and stealing me away. Also, there may or may not be like a little bit of a rapey theme going on here. It has a heart eye when it goes in for attack, which, I don't know, there's a lot to interpret there, and I don't like it. Get your tapey, sticky hands away from me, sir. Get out of here. Finally, coming into number 1, we have When Day Breaks. Okay, I really don't like this SCP because, ugh, gooey, sicky, gross. It makes me feel very, very vomity. So the SCP is often known as SCP-001, but as we know, there are many SCP-001s. This one seems to be an absolute world-ending nightmare. When day breaks refers to an SCP in which the sun gets really hot, like really hot, way hotter than it is right now, meaning that everyone on Earth begins to slowly melt until they become a fleshy goop. Now you'd think that everyone would kind of be melted and fleshy and dead, but no, we stay alive. We kind of become these fleshy, goopy zombies. We're like sentient, fleshy goo, which is gross and creepy, and I need to stop thinking about it because, again, sick. But that isn't the grossest or the creepiest part. You see, it seems that the piles of sentient goo can band together to try and coax those who may be surviving by hiding in the shadows and staying out of the sun. Now they can bring them out of the sun, get them melted, and then, like, take them in as part of their ooze. I don't like it. I'm actually gonna say a hard no to being a melted flesh monster. Let's hope that day never breaks. So guys, that was that. Thank you for sticking around. And at number 10 we have SCP-1000, the apes. So it seems that SCP-1000 is a Keter-class race of nocturnal omnivorous apes that evolved alongside Homo sapiens. It seems that the apes range between 5 to 10 feet in height and weigh between 90 to 270 kilos, which is pretty hefty. They are as intelligent as chimps but have the furrowed brows of gorillas. It seems that the SCPs are prone to carrying a disease that has a 2% chance of infecting anyone who looks at it and them dying on the spot. Beyond that, the likelihood of death increases by 1% for every 20 minutes of exposure. There are some of the ape species that carry higher strains of the disease, which means a person viewing it could actually have a 90% chance of death. It's a lot of percentages, but basically, you could look at it and die, which isn't great. The Foundation notes read, because of SCP-1000's close relation to humanity, it is considered likely that SCP-1000-F1 could eventually transfer to human carriers. Any instance of SCP-1000 finding its way to a major population center could constitute an end-of-the-world scenario with a minimum death toll of redacted. They continue by saying it would possibly lead to the extinction of humanity. Hurrah! So basically, if the apes came near us, we would maybe get infected, and then everyone who looked at us would die, and so on and so forth. Coming in at number 9, we have SCP-077, the gas skull. 077 is the top half of a human skull engraved with runes. Runes! The runes change every lunar month, and they are defined by the full moon rising over Ireland. The skull must not be exposed to any potato-based ingredients or any traces of the vegetable whatsoever. The skull has to be kept in a steel chamber, and every 8 hours Foundation personnel are to enter the containment and read the runes on the skull aloud, but they have to understand the full meaning. If the runes are not read, or they're read wrong or not understood, the skull will produce a luminescent green gas that turns those who are exposed to it to a viscous oozing mass, identified as the rotten flesh of a potato affected with potato blight. I suppose the reason that this could end the world if in the wrong hands, it's kind of obvious. It can produce a gas that turns people into rotten potatoes, which isn't great and also really wouldn't smell very nice. Coming into number 8, we have SCP-3317, the propaganda. 3317 is a text document that has the ability to influence all written text, physical, printed, and digital. The SCP reads as a message from some kind of cult leader, supreme being, or perhaps even an alien civilization. The message is short and simple, but it will take over all aspects of a book or a magazine, no matter how long. I can read you some of it, but I really hope that the text doesn't appear in the subtitles. If so, oops, I've infected YouTube. It reads, a message from our leader, the glorious narrative revolution. It is begun, comrades. The fully vast and superbly wonderful expanse of all literature will bow down in joyous subservience before our creation, the creation of the development of a new textual empire. Let the cruel ruling class tremble at the very idea of our celebrated revolt. We will build gleaming towers of letters wrought with the brotherhood of all narrative extending unto the very heavens themselves. The walls that now separate our realms will buckle and collapse under our inestimable might, and the myriad fragments of text will be joyously united into a single glorious utopia. Join us, fellow countrymen. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Glory to the revolution! Libra Libras. Okay, I actually kind of really enjoyed reading that out, and does anyone else think that I'd be just like a really good dictator? Because Anyway though, it seems that those who read the text are subject to indoctrination, brainwashing. Many express their hatred towards the American government, whoever's in charge. It is thought that the SCP wants to bring about a new world order, which historically has always ended well, hasn't it? Not. Coming in at number 7, we have SCP-4519, the Astronomer's Head. Okay, this SCP is embroiled in a whole load of drama with a terror cell called Sapphire, which we'll get to later. SCP-4519 is the severed head of an American astronomer called Carl Edward Sagan. It's now being used as an anti-religious weapon. Okay, say it twice over, and trust me, it doesn't make any more sense because that's the SCP Foundation for you. Like, what is happening here? The SCP is listed as a Keter class threat level red, which means it's not good. It is thought that the head is stored in a glass jar with preservatives and is somehow able to generate a field of an undetermined nature that can encompass an entire planet. If you're caught in its field, you will be comatose and then you'll reawake to realize your so-called error of your own ways. Honestly, I don't really understand what's happening other than people rejecting religions and going a bit mental, but if the Foundation are worried about it and they've called it Code Red, I'm basically pretty worried about it too. Coming into number 6, we have SCP-079, aka Old Owl. Old Owl reminds me of Old Greg, who I really think should be an SCP. I'm Old Greg. But back to Old Owl. Old Owl is a sentient computer, and like, isn't that where the whole AI apocalypse scenario starts? It has passed the Turing test, which is a test device to sort humans from robots. This means that this SCP can pass for human, but it absolutely isn't. SCP-079 was created in the late 70s. In 1981, its owner attempted to code AI, which may be where it gained its sentience. The SCP is contained now, but it has a desire to connect to other computers. It was captured in the pre-internet era, thankfully, but if it was unleashed today, it is suspected that Old Owl would try and upload sentience to other computers, thus starting the whole cyber takeover thing. Oh, and also the SCP hasn't expressed an interest in the plight of SCP-682, who was on a previous one of our world-ending lists. So if the SCPs and the computers are working together to end the rule of pesky humans, I mean, we're all screwed. Coming into number 5, we have SCP-053, the Toddler. 053 presents as a cute, sweet 3-year-old girl with a very likable personality. Unfortunately though, any human over the age of 3 who makes eye contact with her, touches her, or is simply near to her for 10 minutes or longer will become paranoid and homicidal. It also seems that those affected will try and kill SCP-053, which leads to more people trying to protect her because she looks like a kid. Those who do attempt to kill her will quickly experience a heart attack and die on the spot. 053, even if hurt, can also regenerate and seems entirely ignorant to all the drama. Coming into number 4, we have SCP-4417. These are the kinds of SCPs that give me an absolute headache. Like, honestly, give me a monster or a killer 3-year-old any day, not some anomaly contained in a warehouse, like protected by the Foundation under the ground in bloody Siberia or something. Oh, such a headache. It seems like the SCP is a human trapped in a high-grade vacuum suit. The subject in the suit seems to die and then regenerate after 27 years. Is it related to the fact that so many famous people die age 27? The Foundation notes read, the suit will be unlocked and SCP-44171 will be released. What influence this event will have on our current timeline is unclear, and the fact that it has not yet happened is believed to be an indication of the future occurrence of an XR-class societal regression scenario. Why though? Honestly, the SCP Foundation absolutely hurts my head. Their notes are sometimes like, lol, everyone dies because data expunged. Like I said, just give me a monster. And yes, what is that coming over the hill? My prayers have been answered at number 3. We have SCP-939. I say my prayers, but actually this SCP is some pretty satanic stuff. Look at it! At least it is a monster though, not like a bookmark that touches the 38th page of a first edition and suddenly causes an extinction event. So SCP-939 and friends are like nasty blood bag hyenas, which sounds pretty gross. The SCPs are pack-based predators that don't have any need to eat or absorb nutrients whatsoever, but they like to kill for fun. Their skins are translucent and they seem to be made up of hemoglobin. They are great climbers and will lure prey by imitating human speech in voices of prior victims, which especially messes up people who are out searching for their lost loved ones who have been killed by the beasties. This SCP is absolutely all killer and no filler. They don't have any organs, but they can produce offspring, which is worrying. If unchecked, this SCP can breed and kill at alarming rates. Oh, and they also emit a gas that causes temporary amnesia, just to literally confuse things. It's never simple with an SCP, is it? Never. Coming into number 2, we have SCP-3739, the Milk Flood. I feel like this is something created by the Beef and Dairy Network podcast. It's a surreal favourite of mine and I love it. This is a bovine belter of a creamy world ender. SCP-3739 is a dairy product that has infiltrated advertising collateral and is secretly transmitting images and signals into people's consciousness. Those who are exposed to the messages then dream of cows and milk, and they're drawn to buy dairy products infected with the SCP, a product called mind milk that eventually leads a consumer's brain to becoming curdled. Curdled! Is there anything worse than seeing curdling as well? What? Okay, that's one thing, but it seems that the dreams people have also have the ability to manifest in real life. And one SCP researcher dreamt of a biblical flood sending tsunamis of milk into population centers. They then reported this on a phone, and an automated voice message said please hold, but then a litre a minute of milk started coming out of the phone, which is pretty crazy. The Foundation notes read that the dream aligns with a designated MF class spilled milk scenario on the catastrophe classification list. Honestly, if I'm gonna die in a flood, I don't want it to be a milk flood. Or any flood, really. Finally, coming into numero uno, not actually an SCP at all, possibly something worse, we have the Terracell Sapphire. So I told you I'd get back to you on this one. Sapphire is terrifying as any SCP because it has figured out a way to capture SCP creatures and use them as terror weapons. The Foundation aims to contain, Sapphire aims to weaponize. So what's their beef? It seems that Sapphire are militant atheists. Now I'm all for questioning everything, but Sapphire absolutely wants to eradicate all religion, all religious people, and religious mentions throughout history. Not only that, they want to eradicate belief altogether. They carry out attacks primarily on civilians, who they'll happily kill for political headlines. Mess with civilians, I mean sure, but what would the Scarlet King do if he got wind of this? Or maybe Sapphire are the work of the Scarlet King. They want to destroy all religion, making way for a true and malevolent leader. Either way, an anti-Foundation Terracell who want to kill billions of religious people by weaponizing Keter-class SCPs, to me, they don't sound great. Well, that was quite the ride, wasn't it? Honestly, I think it is almost impossible to talk about SCPs in like a short, sweet, quick video. There's so much information that actually my head hurts and nothing makes sense. Although, I will say thank you to all of you. You guys did a gal a favour. A lot of you tweeted me and had solved the crossword for SCP-1665, which is the crossword. Now this appeared in our mysterious SCP lists, and here's an image of it completed for you. Now we know a little bit more information, I have to say I'm even more curious, although I'm not sure about the answer to 2 down. Coffea? That's not a word. Coffea. Cofifi. Ma? Okay, before I go, I'm